After I saw her at the gas station, I didn't go straight home. I drove aimlessly for nearly 40 minutes, as if constant motion could reorganize my thoughts, as if movement itself could dilute what I had just witnessed. The city blurred into streaks of sodium orange light and dark storefronts. Every red light felt like an accusation. Every green light felt like permission to keep avoiding the question forming in my head. But there was one detail I couldn't shake. The way she held the steering wheel with her left hand slightly tilted, her thumb tapping twice against the leather before shifting gears, a habit she'd had since we bought our first car together, a used sedan that smelled faintly of gasoline and cheap air freshener. Under the harsh white light of the gas station pole, the angle of her face cast the same diagonal shadow I used to see when she drove at night, the same hollow beneath her cheekbone, the same quiet concentration in her posture. It wasn't just physical resemblance. It wasn't a trick of distance or lighting. It was behavior. It was muscle memory. It was something lived in. The steering wheel felt heavier in my hands as I remembered it. I caught myself mirroring her posture without meaning to, my own thumb tapping twice against the leather before I realized what I was doing. The sound echoed inside the car like a code I had forgotten I knew, like a reflex embedded deeper than conscious thought. I stopped at an intersection longer than necessary, the car behind me honking once, briefly, pulling me back into the present. At some point I pulled over in front of a closed office building, turned off the engine, and sat there trying to decide whether what I had seen was a rupture in reality or a delayed revelation about her. The windows of the building reflected my car in fractured panels. In one pane, I looked like a stranger parked in the dark, a silhouette with no context. In another, I looked like a widower chasing a ghost that might not want to be found. The silence inside the car grew dense, almost physical. I could hear my own breathing, uneven, the faint ticking of cooling metal from the engine. That was when I remembered the old storage unit we had rented years earlier, even before the diagnosis, back when we were renovating the house and needed to store furniture temporarily. We had officially closed it after her death, or at least that's what I believed, what I signed, what I told myself had been concluded. But my memory insisted there was something there I had never personally checked, some detail she said she would take care of later. The memory came in fragments. Helena standing in the doorway of the unit, sunlight cutting across stacked boxes, her silhouette framed by metal. Helena cataloging items in a small black notebook, writing in tight, controlled letters. Helena insisting that certain things needed to be preserved properly, that not everything should be discarded just because it was inconvenient. Helena telling me not to worry about paperwork because she would handle it, that administrative details bored me and energized her. She always handled paperwork. She always anticipated contingencies. The next morning, I woke up with the certainty that if I didn't go back, I would spend weeks constructing scenarios in my head, feeding them with speculation until they felt like facts. And scenarios are harder to dismantle than facts. The storage company sat in the same industrial strip on the edge of town, wedged between a tire repair shop and a warehouse with permanently shuttered windows. The sign above the entrance was faded, one of the fluorescent letters flickering even in daylight, as if it couldn't decide whether to remain functional. The parking lot had more potholes than I remembered. I wondered whether the world had deteriorated in my absence or whether I had simply been less observant before, cushioned by routine and assumption. Inside, the air carried that familiar smell of dust, cardboard, and oxidized metal. The hallway stretched long and narrow, illuminated by yellowish lights that hummed faintly overhead, the sound continuous enough to blur into the background, yet impossible to ignore once noticed. The attendant at the desk was younger than the one I remembered from years ago. She wore earbuds around her neck and glanced up with the polite neutrality reserved for minor inconveniences. I explained that I wanted to verify whether there were still any units linked to my social security number or to Helena's. Saying her name aloud in that sterile office felt like testing whether it still existed in administrative systems, whether databases recognized her as more than a closed file. The attendant typed for a few seconds. The clacking of the keyboard sounded disproportionately loud in the quiet room. She frowned slightly at the screen, then looked back at me. "Officially, there are no active contracts," she said. The word officially detached itself from the sentence and settled in my thoughts. Officially, Helena died in a hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and restrained optimism. Officially, the unit had been cleared and the contract terminated. Officially, grief follows stages, neat and sequential. I asked whether I could, even so, access the old unit just to confirm it was empty. I tried to sound casual, as though I were double-checking a forgotten closet before moving on with my day. She hesitated, then printed a simple form and asked for my signature. "Since the contract was terminated, we're not responsible for any remaining items," she added. Remaining items. The phrase suggested residue, oversight, something left behind unintentionally. The hallway felt longer as we walked toward Unit 317. I recognized a slight dent in the metal wall near the corner, remembered bumping into it years ago while carrying a lamp. The scuff marks on the concrete floor seemed both familiar and foreign. My steps slowed as we approached the door. The metal door to 317 was closed, but it didn't look abandoned. There was less dust than I expected around the base, as if it had been lifted not too long ago. The padlock wasn't the same one from years earlier. My name was still on the side label, partially faded but legible, like a relic of a decision supposedly finalized. The attendant unlocked the door with a spare key they kept for administrative cases. The click of the mechanism sounded heavier than it should have. She stepped back to give me privacy. When I lifted the metal door, the screech echoed down the corridor, reverberating against concrete. I braced myself for remnants of the past. Old utensils, disassembled furniture, maybe the chair with one loose leg we had never repaired. Instead, I saw 3 boxes arranged side by side, evenly spaced, as if someone had measured the distance between them with deliberate care. They were sealed with transparent tape that looked far too recent for something that was supposed to have been there for years. The cardboard was clean, not pristine, but not aged either. They weren't boxes I recognized. They didn't bear Helena's methodical handwriting, the small, precise letters she used to label everything from kitchenware to winter coats. I stepped inside and let the door fall halfway down behind me, muting the hallway noise and enclosing myself in that narrow, suspended space. The first box contained women's clothes, but not hers. Not a single piece I remembered seeing in our closet. They were understated, neutral colors, beige, gray, muted blues. Similar sizes to hers, but with a different style. Simpler cuts, fabrics she would normally avoid. Helena favored bold textures, subtle asymmetries, garments that declared intention. These clothes felt deliberately unremarkable, as if designed not to attract attention. I picked up a blouse and, on impulse, brought it to my face. There was no scent at all. No perfume, no trace of a closed closet, none of the detergent she insisted on buying despite its higher price. Just neutral fabric, almost anonymous. The internal tags had been cut off precisely, trimmed flush with the seam. The cuts were clean, almost surgical. Some sizes didn't exactly match what she used to wear. Close enough to pass at a glance. Not exact enough to confirm. Nothing screamed forgery, but nothing felt familiar. In the second box I found documents, rental agreements, copies of identification, purchase receipts, all in another woman's name. A name I had seen before. The same one listed on the passport I had discovered tucked behind old files weeks ago. The paper was excessively pristine. No natural fold marks, no smudges, no signs of casual handling. The dates followed a sequence almost too perfect, as if every month had been filled in with mathematical discipline. The signatures were extremely similar to one another, consistent in angle and pressure, as if practiced repeatedly until achieving uniformity. Common stamps typically found on that kind of contract were missing. The fonts were standard, the formatting clean, margins aligned with suspicious precision. Everything was correct, and at the same time too organized. The third box was the one that made me sit down on the cold storage floor. Inside were photographs. Not ours. Not of our house. They were images of places I had never visited with Helena. A corner cafe I didn't recognize. A seaside park that didn't exist in our city. A small balcony with plants she had never grown. The light in the photos suggested late afternoons, the golden hour she loved to capture. But these weren't taken by her. Or if they were, she had chosen angles that excluded any trace of her usual life. In two of the photos, in the background, there was a woman seen from behind. The hair, the posture, the way she held her bag, everything triggered recognition. But her face was always out of focus or cut off by the frame, as if someone had carefully avoided clarity. I examined the edges of the photographs. No fingerprints, no handwritten notes. The print quality was professional. What disturbed me most wasn't finding traces of another life. It was realizing that life seemed carefully arranged to be found. Receipts in chronological order, copies neatly aligned, selected photographs. No duplicates, no clutter. It was a curated set, a narrative in cardboard form. I checked the corners of the unit, half expecting hidden cameras, some sign that my reaction was part of the design. There was nothing but bare concrete and humming lights. I left with one photograph in my pocket, sliding it into my wallet. I didn't tell the attendant what I had seen. She didn't ask. At home, I placed the photograph under my desk lamp and stared at it for hours, zooming in, adjusting contrast, searching for definitive proof, a scar, a birthmark, something uniquely hers. Nothing conclusive, just resemblance. The mind shapes images when it wants confirmation. Grief rewrites faces. Memory smooths inconsistencies. Even so, the feeling persisted that I had stumbled upon something assembled with intimate knowledge of me. I revisited old conversations in my head. 2 years before the diagnosis, Helena mentioned she was thinking about diversifying personal risk. I had laughed, assuming it was financial jargon. She didn't elaborate. She simply said every intelligent person keeps options open. At the time, I admired the abstraction. Now it felt literal. I searched old bank records that night. Small purchases in neighborhoods we never frequented. Low amounts. Groceries, pharmacy items, home decor. Nothing dramatic, but together they outlined an alternative routine. A different grocery store, a different pharmacy, a different rhythm of living. Still, the pattern stayed within safe limits, as if calibrated not to trigger alarm. I leaned back and imagined logistics, another apartment, another set of keys, another calendar. Or perhaps I was assembling coincidence into conspiracy. Among the photographs, there had been a brown envelope with my name written by hand. The handwriting resembled hers enough to unsettle, but not enough to confirm. I opened it at home. Inside was a folded sheet, no signature, no date. Some things don't belong to the one who finds them. They belong to the right moment. The sentence implied intention, timing, audience. I scheduled an appointment with my therapist and told him about the gas station, the unit, the boxes. He listened, fingers steepled. "It's possible you're connecting non-existent dots," he said. "I know," I replied. "That's what scares me." He asked, "If you were wrong, what would change?" If I were wrong, Helena died, as they said. The unit was coincidence. The woman at the gas station a look-alike. If I were wrong, I was grieving poorly. But if I were right, then the world had been structured around my perception in ways I didn't understand. When I returned to the unit days later, it was empty, not completely dusty. There was a cleaner rectangle on the floor where the boxes had been. The padlock had been changed again. The attendant insisted no access had been recorded. I crouched and ran my fingers over the concrete. A faint outline remained, like memory pressed into matter. The photograph in my wallet proved the boxes had existed. The rest had been removed with silent efficiency. Something shifted then. Until that moment, I had believed in two options. Either Helena was alive and had built another life, or I was unraveling. But the disappearance introduced a third possibility. Maybe what I found wasn't hers. Maybe the objects were selected based on what someone believed I would recognize: clothes in the right size, gestures from behind, documents aligned with my expectations, as if someone had studied my memory before assembling that narrative. I returned home and combed through old emails, analyzing her phrasing, her signatures, the loops in her handwriting. The envelope was similar but not identical, close enough to destabilize, different enough to deny certainty. Who benefits from making me doubt my own memory? If Helena orchestrated it, she anticipated my investigation. If someone else did, they understood me almost as well as she did. I began noticing small irregularities around the house: a book slightly misaligned, a drawer resisting closure, my old watch in the kitchen when I was sure I'd left it upstairs. Paranoia feeds on ambiguity, and ambiguity was multiplying. One night I drove back to the gas station at the same hour. I parked across the street and waited. Cars came and went. At one point, a woman with similar hair stepped out of a sedan, and my heart surged before I saw her face. It wasn't her. I waited nearly an hour. Nothing. As I drove home, clarity settled uncomfortably. If I were being led, random waiting would not yield answers. Whoever arranged the storage unit, it was arranged, wanted me to see it once, not twice. The message echoed. Some things belong to the right moment. Maybe that moment had passed, or maybe it was beginning. I no longer know whether Helena is alive, but I am beginning to consider another possibility. Maybe the woman at the gas station is real, entirely separate from Helena. Maybe the life in the storage unit was never hers. Maybe it was constructed with deliberate precision, measurements adjusted to my expectations, artifacts calibrated to my memory, gaps engineered to provoke pursuit. Maybe someone needed me to question the official version of events. Maybe someone needed me destabilized, attentive, uncertain. Because if the narrative in that storage unit was built for me, then I am not uncovering a hidden truth. I am participating in one, and that changes everything. It stops being just about a wife who built another life. It becomes about someone who built a parallel story, knowing exactly how I would react, how I would doubt, how I would chase patterns. And if that's the case, I'm not chasing anyone. I'm being led. The question is no longer where Helena is. The question is who wants me to look for her, and why, and what happens when I finally reach the place they intend for me to reach.